BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the Biotechnology Industry Organization. Bio, we're doing big things. Your trusted source for biotechnology information and analysis. BioCentury This Week.
There are a number of perverse incentives. The first perverse incentive is the way that over the last 15 years, the regulatory requirements by both the FDA and the EMA have increased hugely. During the early 1990s, I was chairman of something called the Committee on Safety of Medicines, which was the body then that decided whether new drugs went on the market and whether existing ones came off the market. And although we were technically only advisory to ministers, the deal was that ministers always accepted the committee's advice, and if there was any trouble, I went on the television, and I went on the television many times. When I became chairman, I did a very careful survey, which I published, looking at the numbers of people who were exposed to a new chemical entity, a new biologically active substance, at the time of our marketing authorization, and the median was 1,500. The median now is 12,000. Now, it is a huge increase, with not much gain, not much benefit from these increased numbers.
From your position now at UCSF, what can the academic world do to reduce the time, cost, and uncertainty of drug development?
Well, I think academia is in the perfect place to answer some of the questions that have arisen as a result of some of the last 2 decades of wonderful productivity in the pharma and biotech space. That productivity is at risk. And in part, it's at risk because of the cost and time, and mainly the uncertainty. I actually think that's the #1 driver of the challenge. And so UCSF, we're trying to address that uncertainty. It starts, like all things in science do, with a deep understanding of the biology of why things go wrong. So we've been pushing more and more to say, okay, if we understand the biology in a worm, in a fruit fly, how quickly can we ask and answer that question in a human being?
I think we do have a real problem in biotech venture capital and in healthcare venture investing in general. And it's driven by a number of major factors. I think the 4 biggest factors that are hurting the industry right now are, first of all, frankly, the FDA. Secondly, the state of the capital markets, public capital markets primarily. Third, government uncertainty, as well as increasing interference in the markets. And finally, the decline, shrinking, and constraints that big pharma, our traditional partners and ultimate buyers of last resort, is going through as a result of failure of R&D productivity and patent cliffs, with over $100 billion in revenues expiring as patents go away over the next couple of years.
Dr. Fauci, I wanted to start with this kind of to sum up. How did the original insight come up that led you down this path that might end up in creating a universal flu vaccine?
Yes. The skeptics about an influenza vaccine that's universal saying, well, you get exposed to influenza practically every year, you get vaccinated. If you're not going to have universal protection against next year's the way we do, how do you imagine that you're going to do that experimentally? And the insight came when investigators were able to identify a part of that virus that isn't readily seen by the immune system, that when you make an antibody against that, you actually can, in the test tube, protect against a wide range of influenza. So the thought occurred, well, you don't make that when you have a natural infection. You don't make a lot of it when you get a vaccination. So how can we get the body to make a lot of that?
We're in an era of constrained resources, but you're arguing, and have argued consistently, for more funding for biomedical research, more for NIH, more for FDA. How do you make that case?
Well, it's easy to make that case. First, 50% of all economic growth over the last century has come from medical advancements in sanitation. The general public and many people in government might not remember, but at the start of the 20th century, 1 in 5 Americans lost their life by their 5th birthday. So one of the great achievements, and probably the greatest achievement of the last century, was the doubling of life expectancy on the planet. And so if you want to create jobs, the number one stimulus is solving some of these serious diseases.
We're joined now by Senator Richard Blumenthal. Senator Blumenthal, I wanted to start by asking you, what are the concerns that led you to sponsor the GAIN Act?
Very definite concerns about the dwindling supplies of new antibiotics and, of course, the need for them in light of the evolution of germs to become the so-called superbugs that are antibiotic resistant and cause some of the most pernicious and insidious infections and diseases like MRSA, E. coli, Acinetobacter brought back by the troops from Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the clear public health needs, as I heard from my constituents in Connecticut and as my colleagues heard from theirs around the country, prompted me to think that we need new incentives for the development of new antibiotics.
You're watching BioCentury This Week.